Maybe you've noticed that not once have I completed an episode full of design information on this podcast. No color wheels have been brought forth. I've not pontificated on the merits of design thinking, and color science has not entered the chat. But I'm a designer. Yep. And this is also our final episode of season 1. True. So is it finally time to talk vector versus pixel? Nope. Hi, I'm Amy Jackson, creative director, award-winning designer, color nerd, and unapologetic brand evangelist. And this is Brand is Not a 4-letter word. The fact is, design is a very important part of your brand, but you've heard me say since episode 1 how it doesn't and can't define your brand, right? Your brand isn't just a logo or color palette. Instead, we've jumped into how to develop your brand's character and its promise. We've talked about identifying your target audience, determining your arena and positioning, creating messaging, and executing experiences that ladder back to your authentic brand self. There's a reason for this. Designing your brand's aesthetic cannot be contained in a single episode or even a season of a podcast. Just like much of the work I've shared here at a rooftop level needs guidance from someone trained like me and experienced in building actionable, aspirational, and authentic brands, and it needs key stakeholders like you to make it all work. So I'm not going to dive into color matching or theories in this season. You'll have to wait for me to collect you at a party and corner you for all those details. But we are going to revisit my biggest piece of advice one more time. Consistency will evolve or erode your brand. Here's the thing. Consistency. The 1,000 small gestures over time. That's not boring or rigid. It's the reason people trust you. And I know, as someone who has stared at a blank screen thinking, I am not sure I can make one more conference logo. There is nothing left. There is nothing fresh. That sometimes people closest to the brand can be the most dangerous. Because we're told all the time, and we even feel it all for ourselves, we want to make sure our brand is fresh, creative, innovative even. We think that this is the only way to cut through the noise and stand out in our industry for our audiences. But the target audience we're trying to connect with is looking for us to feel familiar, to seem reliable, and be safe for them to choose because their budgets are precious and their problems feel insurmountable. And that's where your brand comes into play. Brand consistency builds recognition. That's what cuts through the noise, not something totally new and off-brand. Brand consistency triggers recall. Most experts say that it takes 5 to 13 touch points to make a sale, but it can take up to 1,000 impressions to gain those touches. Recall matters to the math behind that. Brand consistency levels up your brand trust. When your brand promise matches your brand experience repeatedly over time, cumulatively, in 1,000 small ways, your message holds more weight and your brand feels authentic to your target audience, because it is. Which is why that brand consistency also ensures brand credibility. Brand consistency is, in fact, the fastest path to preference. Now, people don't choose brands because they're new. They choose brands because they're known. So let's break down the psychology of why brand consistency matters. First, humans are pattern seeking. At a neurological level, the human brain is designed to conserve energy. And one of the primary ways it does this is by identifying patterns quickly so that it doesn't have to evaluate every situation from scratch. The brain is actually a prediction machine. I read that neuroscientists like Carl Friston described the brain as a constant prediction of what will happen next based on past experience. When something fits an existing pattern, the brain relaxes, right? And when it doesn't, the brain has to work harder. In fact, pattern recognition is a survival mechanism. Think back, maybe not think back, imagine back. Early humans recognized patterns like, ooh, that wrestling sound sounds dangerous, must be danger. Oh, this berry usually means food. more things like that helped them survive. That wiring still exists in us today. It just applies to other things like brands and interfaces instead of predators. Our brain prefers cognitive fluency, as I've learned, or the ease with which something is processed. Research consistently shows that people, one, like things more when they're easier to understand, which seems easy to understand. Two, judge familiar things as more credible. And three, believable, repeated statements are believed to be true more than unfamiliar ones. So that's a lot to unpack, right? As long as the statement is hopefully within a remote possibility of being believable, okay, sign me up. I believe it. Even if something that has been proven to be true but not to me yet is something new, I'm likely not to believe it as quickly. Why? Because the like things that I understood about made it easier to understand this statement too. And because I judged what I already was familiar with to have more credibility. See how it's a messy scientific loop. In other words, when something feels familiar, it feels safe. Wasn't that much easier to think about? So when we take away from brand consistency, things like, hey, it reduces cognitive load, it speeds my decision-making process up, and it signals reliability, it makes sense. Brand consistency matters, especially when you think about it in crowded arenas. Familiarity beats novelty. We trust what we recognize, and this is where branding comes in directly. There's a well-documented psychological principle called the mere exposure effect, and I believe it was first identified by a psychologist. In simple terms, the more we are exposed to something, the more we tend to like it and trust it, even if we don't conscientiously realize why. There's a well-documented psychological principle called the mere exposure effect, and it was first identified by a psychologist whose first name is Robert and whose last name I will butcher as Zajonik. In simple terms, the more we are exposed to something, the more we tend to like it and trust it, even if we don't really consciously realize why. In fact, some studies show that people are more likely to choose familiar brands over unfamiliar ones, trust familiar logos, colors, and messaging, and attribute higher quality to brands they recognize even when the products are objectively similar. And Nielsen research has shown that consistency in brand presentation can increase revenue by up to 23%. Largely because consistency fuels recognition and trust. In high-choice environments like grocery stores, SaaS tools, or nonprofits competing for attention, people don't ever evaluate every option. They first eliminate those unfamiliar ones. So recognition doesn't just help you, it helps your brand survive the first round of mental elimination. Think of your own experiences in grocery stores. When you're walking down the soda aisle, your brain isn't carefully evaluating every single can. It's scanning for something it recognizes. The color, the logo, the promise. Recognition equals reassurance. That's why Coca-Cola always comes home with me. I don't even think it's overinflated to state that consistency matters more than cleverness. A brand that changes its look, tone, or message every 6 months or less might feel exciting internally. But externally, it forces people to relearn who you are. And people don't like relearning or broccoli. Now, moving on. What I'm saying in all of this is that when a brand shows up consistently, they're not being boring. They're being human, authentic, aspirational, actionable. Let's create a checklist so you can determine just what consistency is and isn't, shall we? First, the is's. Consistency is clear positioning expressed repeatedly. Visual and verbal, written and heard, alignment. Predictable and positive experiences. Now here's what consistency is not. Using the same graphic forever. Saying the same thing in the same way all the time. And avoiding evolution. So see, you can create and then it can evolve and should without confusing people. Now, I've repeatedly mentioned how consistency is key for large internal organizations, but it's important to remember that your brand consistency can skew even in a small 1 or 2 people environment as well. You don't need a massive team, a high budget, or daily content to ensure your brand is consistent. And you don't need one to blow it either. That's why it's important for brands of all sizes, small, medium, large, extra large, and exponential, to set up clear guardrails, embrace brand in the decision-making process every day, and to build repeatable systems that ensure consistency and execution, not just vision. Believe it or not, consistency is actually a time saver. When you don't have to reinvent the wheel for every creative moment or customer experience, when you don't start from scratch every single time you make a decision, when you look at your business's budget, when you look at their sales, strategy, or engagement, you aren't just creating something better for your audience, you're giving yourself a break too. So here is this episode's brand hack. In the last episode, we picked one touch point to audit, but now I want you to gather a splattering of items across all of your channels: email, social media, print, commercials, events, customer service scripts, financial statements, networking bullets, trade show experiences, sales collateral, anything I didn't say that made you think, yes, pull that together, all the places. You have 3 questions you're going to ask. Looking across everything, do we sound like the same brand everywhere? Do we sound the same everywhere? Do we sound like who we're supposed to sound like every single place? Consistency. 2, are these visuals cohesive? Now, don't get hung up by thinking just the logo. Did it get skewed? Or what about this one hero image? I'm talking about things like your signatures, your fonts, all of those things. Are these visually cohesive? Does the paper, does the size, does the actual amount of content, do that work together? Does it look consistent all those places? And is the message clear and aligned with our positioning? So for this one, you might have to skim a few paragraphs. Pick a little here and there, and then decide, is this clear? And does this match how we say we were going to be? This is what gives creativity a foundation to evolve. It's what allows designs to shift as needed and feel fresh without feeling misaligned. When people know who you are, they can begin to trust you. And when they trust you, they choose you. And all of that begins with your brand's consistency. Because brand isn't a 4-letter word. It's your best strategy and your strongest story. Let's build your brand together. Learn how at brandisnotafourletterword.com, where strategy and storytelling meet design.